I'm showing you notes. These are my notes. They're very messy, and I spilled coffee on them yesterday. So there's a difference between what I say and the notes, isn't it? But the notes are basically a kind of point-by-point outline of what I'm saying vocally. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to postpone the second assignment until the 16th. You have until the 16th at midnight. Upload them, okay? Gives you more time. And I would say that we're going to be continuing with European history for a while, but maybe at the end, by the end of next week, we'll be turning to the Ottomans. So we're continuing with our sort of development of European history. And we've been dealing with this incredible revolution or this gigantic Reformation, Protestant Reformation. I explained how it grew out of humanism and Erasmus, and we'll come to that in the review when we do that. And we saw that it took various forms. Luther's sort of doctrines turned into the state religion of Lutheranism, which dominated northern Germany. The principalities and the cities there and in Scandinavia became Lutheran, became that confession. We see that in England, at first, Henry VIII, although he broke with Rome, essentially over political questions, he was not prepared to accept Luther's teaching, and he actually uh, approved of Erasmus's ideas in under Henry VIII. Basically, Protestantism took that form, although Erasmus himself never became a Protestant. A kind of Erasmian Catholicism was the beginning of Anglicanism. But by the time that Elizabeth, his daughter, took the throne in the second half of the 16th century, Calvinism became the theological basis of Anglicanism. And then we see in, for example, German Switzerland, there's a man by the name of Zwingli. He took up Luther's ideas in the cities of German Switzerland. It became Zwinglian in their Protestantism. And we also saw that the revolution of the common man in Germany, this mass movement, out of that, a movement which was suppressed, an unsuccessful revolution, because it was not merely against the church. It turned into an attempt to overthrow feudalism and indeed even capitalism. And so you get Anabaptism, which means sort of adult baptism, and out of that come the Mennonites and the Hutterites. And the Hutterites were communists, and still are communists. And you can see that More's ideas in Utopia, they came out of his head, but there was a sort of atmosphere that people thought that way back in the 16th century. But I would say that in terms of the historically most potent form of Protestantism, the strongest, was this very characteristically middle-class form of religion, which we see developing out of the ideas of John Calvin. Calvin was a lawyer in France. He left, went to Geneva because the King of France would not follow Henry VIII and become a Protestant. And so Calvin moved to Geneva. He was very forceful. I would compare him to Lenin in terms of his sort of power of his thinking and his organizational capacity. He took over the city-state of Geneva, he and his followers, and this state was a kind of independent republic, and they converted it into a bastion of Calvinism. And so why is Calvin important? Because he published a book in which the Christian Institutes, in which the key ideas of Protestantism were carefully summed up and organized. And this sense of organization reflected itself also in the church. He created a new form of church organization, rejecting hierarchy, rejecting bishops, and rather a form of church organization which was very cohesive, strong, independent of the state, which we call Presbyterianism, which is basically the church ruled by ministers and elders. They got this out of certain texts in the New Testament. This is the basis of the Presbyterian form. Ministers and elders formed what they called the consistory, and this was the leadership of the church. But it is notable that the elders, they were laymen, generally they were the richest merchants in these communities that went over to Calvinism. So his organizational sense, in the sense of laying out the precepts of Calvinism, of Protestantism, and then organizing this church independently of the state. And finally, I made a big deal out of the so-called Protestant ethic or Puritanism, because this city of Geneva, run by the Calvinists, um, it imposed a very strict ethic or discipline on the population. Um, People in the Middle Ages living in the towns, there was kind of a moral chaos, and Calvin imposes this strict discipline um, in which really fancy dress, fornication, gambling, all of that is suppressed. There is a repression of the sensual, pleasurable aspects of things, and the sexual aspects of things are repressed. Everybody wears black clothes and so on, and they the family cell become controlled by the father. The patriarchal father is a key aspect of this. The father controlling the mother and the children. Their obedience to the father is a central aspect, and all of this. The purpose of this is to impose a discipline, a work discipline. What the father and mother do, along with others in the community, and what the children are taught to do, is to work, to prepare yourself for a life of disciplined work. And as part of this teaching, there is the idea that the accumulation of wealth is a good thing, it's not a bad thing. In fact, it's a sign of God's God's favor that you accumulate money. And these ideas, because they were much talked about by a German sociologist in the beginning of the 20th century by the name of Max Weber, are called the Weber thesis, or the Weber thesis about the Protestant ethic, which Weber associated with the development of capitalism. Capitalism and Protestantism is the religion of the capitalists. And there seems to be a definite correlation, because where do you see Calvinism taking hold? Precisely in those areas of Western Europe where capitalism is gaining strength. I'm talking about England, I'm talking about Scotland, I'm talking about the Low Countries, I'm talking about northern Germany, I'm talking about northern France. In these areas, this is where Calvinism became popular. Capitalism, Calvinism, the two seem to go together. In any case, this kind of religion, it was also characterized by its militancy. The Calvinists, of course, they believed themselves inspired by the gospel, were very aggressive about advancing their religion. And they had the sort of organized, disciplined attitudes which made that possible. And of course, the rulers of Europe, the Catholic rulers of Europe, considered to, and indeed eventually even the Protestant rulers in England, considered this form of militant, middle-class form of religion as subversive, as subverting the authority of kings and princes and so on. Calvinists were not afraid to criticize the rulers, the hierarchy, and Europe, of course, was a very hierarchical society. The Catholic Church was hierarchical, but so too was the feudal system was a hierarchical system, and this system tended to level the difference, and so there is a subversive quality to it. And I would say that Protestantism stood, whereas Catholicism was all about the unity of Europe. Protestantism in general tended toward diversity, depending on local circumstances. And of course, these ideas were fatal to any idea of Christianity as a unity, or Charles V's ideas of a Europe sort of a recreation of the Roman Empire. No, the triumph of Protestantism meant both political and religious diversity, is what I would say. Well, so it seems, if you look at the situation by the close of the 1530s, it seems as though, well, the Protestants, they have seceded from the Roman Catholic Church. Northern Europe, most of Northern Europe has gone Protestant, and places like France, which is still Catholic formally, the Protestants, especially the Calvinist variety, they seem to be making progress. The future lies with the Protestants. But lo and behold, we see that, in fact, the Catholic Church stages a comeback. So, having dealt with the Protestants now, we see that the Protestant Reformation is followed by the Catholic Counter-Reformation. The Catholic Church comes back. It fights back. And there is a counter-movement within Europe as between the progress of the Reformation and the recovery of the Catholic Church, which we call the Counter-Reformation. And the clash between the two of these movements leads to religious wars. The second half of the 16th century and the first part of the 17th century is a period of the religious wars. So what I want to do now is I want to describe the Counter-Reformation, what it was all about, what the Catholic revival was all about, and then we'll look at the first of these wars of religion, if you can call them, which broke out in the Low Countries during the 1560s. So first the Counter-Reformation, and then the first war of religion, which broke out in the Netherlands, in the Low Countries. Now, we've already seen that, as a matter of fact, it's true that Luther brought the secession of Northern Europe from the Catholic Church, but the Catholic Church was actually gaining ground elsewhere. We've already seen that the Spaniards conquered Latin America, and they brought with them the Catholic religion, and the people on the in South America were all converted to the Roman Catholic faith. This is a process that's going on right through the 16th century. Well, that's part of the Counter-Reformation. It already starts even prior to Luther's revolt. But of course, so this is a gain for the Roman Catholic faith. But also the popes reacting to the challenge of Luther and to the other Protestants decided that it was necessary to call together all the leaders of the Catholic Church and to discuss under the auspices of the Pope, to discuss a program of reform and revival, which would lead to the reconquest of the Protestants. And this took the form of the Council of Trent. The Pope called a council of the church, the bishops, the big abbots, the theologians. They were all called to a small town, the town of Trent, which is in the foothills of the Alps in northern Italy, not that far from Switzerland and Germany, where the Protestants were. There, a council of the church in various sessions met between 1545 and 63. This church council, the Council of Trent. And there, under the guidance of the Pope, he was not present, but his emissaries were, the Catholic Church reiterated its basic precepts, its basic teaching, rather than conciliating the Protestants with their ideas of faith alone, etc., and the gospel. The Council of Trent reiterated the basic principles of Roman Catholicism. Above all, the authority of the popes, based on the sort of idea of Saint Peter having been given the keys. This is in the Gospel of Matthew. Christ gives the keys to the church to Peter, and Peter is the head of the church. That's the Petrine or Peter doctrine. The Pope at the head of the church, and the idea that the church is the only path to salvation, and that the church is a hierarchy. It's a hierarchical organization, in contrast to the democratic tendencies of the Protestants. But also things like the worship of the saints, the worship of Mary, the belief in the importance of angels, pilgrimages, fasting, the saying of the rosary. All of the characteristic features of Roman Catholic practice are all reiterated. And I would above all stress that at the end of the day, the Catholics are told, without the intermediation of this church hierarchy, without resort to the priest, there is no salvation. In contrast to Luther's idea that all you have to do is read the Bible and believe in justification. It's a priesthood of all believers. Anybody who believes is in fact a priest, has a direct relationship with God. The Catholic doctrine is no. You have to take the works. You have to take the sacraments that are only available through the priest. Now, backing this reassertion of the basic beliefs of the church through the Catholic Church is the fact that politically, the church strengthens itself by virtue of the fact that the Pope was the ruler of Rome and the surrounding territory. And this had begun earlier, but the popes make sure that they control all of the territory of central Italy, from almost to the outskirts of Venice, down almost to Naples. That whole very rich land of central Italy is the papal state. And just like the King of France has consolidated France into a centralized government, or the Spanish kings have done the same in Spain, the popes make themselves the rulers over the papal state, make sure they have a bureaucracy, they have a little army, they have the Inquisition, they have other courts. They are in control, and this means that they have a steady stream of revenue from the people, the peasants, and the townsmen who live in this area that comes in. It's the base of the finances. Of course, they also have streams of revenue from the churches which remain Catholic in Southern Europe, like Spain and so on. So there is, in fact, the papacy is getting stronger politically and financially. And this makes possible a huge architectural and artistic program centered on Rome. Rome becomes a veritable political and religious capital, because at this point, Rome is reconstructed by the popes of the 16th century into a great political capital. New churches, new sort of a new layout of the roads, the avenues of the city. The modern city of Rome is built by the popes of the 16th century, and of course, at the center of this is St. Peter's Cathedral, which was the architect was, of course, Michelangelo, and so you have this tremendous construction program, and the whole city. There are new churches, and throughout the churches, of course, a new form of art, a religious art for the most part, but a new form of art which is meant to reinforce the basic teachings of the Catholic Church. We call this the Baroque art, as against Renaissance art. Baroque art and Baroque architecture is essentially invented by the papacy in the 16th century, because the popes and the leaders of the Catholic religion believe that people aren't simply persuaded by religious principle. They're also persuaded by feeling, by emotion, and an art which emphasizes the miraculous or the work of the saints many people still don't know how to read. They will be impressed by this art. They will be impressed by the great buildings, including St. Peter, the power, the grandeur of Rome can continue to convince many people. And in fact, this proved to be the case. They mastered the Roman Catholic Church of the 16th and 17th century mastered the arts of media and propaganda way before the invention of television or the RT. You see this clearly in 17th century Rome in this period. Now, backing. Oh, by the way, I've put in UmLearn under illustrations is a link to a film called Grandeur and Obedience, and it portrays this whole setup. It's a magnificent film. The music and the visuals are incredible. Which is sort of this, if you want to follow this, this is a very good film about the visual side of the Counter-Reformation. But backing this up is the fact that, taking a lesson from the Spanish kings, the Roman popes revived the Roman Inquisition. There is the Spanish Inquisition. Now the Roman Inquisition. Ferret out these Protestants. Ferret out these deviants. Ferret out these Machiavellians. Anybody who's deviant, we will deal with them through the Inquisition. So the Inquisition is revived by the Roman Pope. In addition to this, we know that the printed book is subversive. Look at Luther, but all people are using the printing press to print all kinds of stuff that we don't agree with. So the popes established what they call an index, the Roman index, a list of books that continued to grow right through the early modern period, books which were prohibited, including the writings of Erasmus. These were all burned in the fire by the papacy. So the Inquisition and the Index. In addition to that, the papacy encouraged and patronized new religious orders. Their name, most of the names are not important. The Barnabites, the Theatines, the Barefoot or the Discalced, Augustinians. There's a whole stream of these new religious orders, whose purpose is to serve as agents of of the papacy, um, inculcating Roman Catholic ideas in the population, providing charity in the name of the Roman Catholic Church in order to gain influence amongst the mass of the people. And also identifying who amongst the population have deviant or heretical ideas. These are some of the purposes that these missions serve. But they also spread the faith to people who are not Catholic. They convert people to the Catholic faith. These are attempts to sort of spread the Catholic religion to other places. And amongst these new orders of the church, the most important were the Jesuits. And this group one should take note of. The Jesuits were founded by, actually he was a Spaniard by the name of Loyola, a former soldier who got wounded and became religious. He dedicated himself and his followers to, took an oath of loyalty to the Pope. And so the Jesuit order were a special elite. To get into the Jesuit order, you had to be highly qualified, highly educated, totally devoted in a religious sense to the advancing the cause of the Roman Catholic religion, both intellectually and emotionally. And the Jesuits did two things. In the first place, they created schools. Schools not for everybody, but schools especially for the nobility and the rich members of the middle class. Their kids, their boys, were sent to these Jesuit schools, and they were thoroughly indoctrinated with the principles of the Roman Catholic faith. At the same time, they were given an excellent education, a humanist education. The Jesuits took up all of the profane ideas of the humanists, of the classical, and they married it to the Catholic faith, and this became the basis of the elite education offered by the Jesuits. And of course, the idea was if you can educate the young sons of the nobles and of the wealthy bourgeois, you convert the elite, and the rest of the population follows. And so you have this tradition of Jesuit education, which of course perpetuated itself right into the present. I mean, today in Winnipeg, we have a school, St. Paul's, which is a Jesuit school. It's out of that tradition, just to show you that this persists. The other thing is that they went on missions. Many of the missions in Latin America there were Franciscans involved and so on, but especially the Jesuits in terms of converting the indigenous populations of Latin America. They were very important. And the Jesuits went further afield to Asia. A man by the name of Francis Xavier, that's the name of a town west of Winnipeg, Francis Xavier, he went out to Asia and went to Japan, to Korea, to Indonesia, and he began to spread the Roman Catholic faith. Other Jesuits went to China, and there's a whole history of the activities of the Jesuits in these Asian countries. And some Asians did convert to Christianity, although there was a lot of suspicion as well. There's a whole history that we will touch upon later. So you can see that if you take this all together, what I've outlined, that the Roman Catholic faith, which had been decadent, there's no question, prior to the Reformation, by the middle of the 16th century, it was restoring itself. And especially it was the princes, the kings, the emperors, the landlord class. The church itself was a great landlord, and I made that point. This was a religion of hierarchy, grandeur, and obedience, a religion that was closely related to the idea of the rule of the landlord class, the rule of kings, a sense of hierarchy, of subordination. And so the rulers of Europe, who were suspicious of the Protestants, and especially of the Calvinists, and I associated the Calvinists, I think, legitimately with capitalism, the Roman Catholic faith was associated with the perpetuation of feudalism. The perpetuation of feudalism. Power lay in the land, in hierarchy, in obedience. And so the princes of Europe tended to support the political basis for this comeback was the support of many of the rulers, particularly you see it, the Southern Europe and Eastern Europe. That is where the Roman Catholic faith, the more advanced areas of Northwestern Europe, which are becoming capitalist, they are attracted to Protestantism, to Calvinism, whereas Spain, Portugal, Italy, Southern Germany and Eastern Germany, Austria, and beyond to Poland, Hungary, these are the areas where particularly the Roman Catholic faith sort of refortifies itself in the Counter-Reformation. However, there was, as you can imagine, an incredible sort of ideological conflict between Calvinism or Protestantism and Catholicism during the 16th century. We have the printing presses, and the printing presses during this period of religious conflict were devoted to basically religious arguments, fierce arguments between Catholics and Protestants. And these arguments, and it is comparable to the Cold War period that they say is no longer with us, where the fight was between capitalism and communism. This is comparable to the Cold War. It's a Cold War in the 16th century, but from a Cold War, it turns into a hot war because we see that the antagonism between these two groups, particularly in areas where there was an overlap between Catholic populations and Protestant populations, it set the stage for, in fact, religious war. And the first of these religious wars that I want to deal with is the one that broke out in the Netherlands, in the Low Countries, in what today is Holland and Belgium. Because there was, at that time, they were not divided as they are today into two distinct states. No, this was called the Low Countries, or the Netherlands. Netherlands means Low Countries, back in these times. Well, the Netherlands had become the richest area of Europe in the course of the 16th century. Italy, which when we started this course, that was the center of the emerging capitalism. But by the 1540s, the Netherlands, given the growing importance of the Atlantic, the Netherlands, the rise of the Atlantic, and the Netherlands was the center of this. And there were many, many towns and cities which were extremely prosperous because of their manufacturing, mainly textile manufacturing, but also other industries in the Low Countries. And at the center of this was the city of Antwerp, which is, of course, in that part which we call Belgium. This was the center of this commercial and manufacturing activities. Now, there were something like 17 separate provinces in the Low Countries. There was no one country. One of the provinces that was important was Holland, up in the northern part. But it was part of this grouping of 17 separate provinces. And each of these provinces, there were towns. They all had their charters of liberties, their privileges. They were autonomous, largely autonomous. They had self-government. And even when they provided taxes for the prince, often there would be little parliaments, representative assemblies, which would vote the taxes to the prince. And who was the prince? Charles V. Charles V. He, as part of his empire that I've outlined, he ruled this area. They provided him by vote taxes. They voted taxes to him and so on, and he protected the privileges. This was becoming the richest part of his empire, and so there was a relationship, a sort of a mutuality between Charles V and these 17 provinces and their towns. But everything suddenly changed when Charles V retired, a broken man, and his son, Philip II, 15 states are given, 1550 in key words, 1556 to 98, because Philip II was a fanatical Catholic. And moreover, he was the absolute ruler of Spain. And just as Spain was now completely organized under the principles of highly centralized absolutist government and backed up by the Roman Catholic Inquisition, he was determined to impose this on the Netherlands, to break the local privileges, to impose a bureaucracy, to set up a rational tax system which would guarantee him skim off the wealth of the Netherlands. And last but not least, he intended to impose the Spanish Inquisition on the Netherlands. Now, this was a crazy thing to do because the Netherlands was filled with heretics. Of course, I would say the majority of the population of the Netherlands were still Catholics, but they were not fanatics. They tended to read the works of Erasmus, as a matter of fact. And so there was this sort of moderate Catholicism, but there were also Lutherans, there were Calvinists, there were Anabaptists, the Mennonites were organizing themselves in the Netherlands, and there were even some Jews there. And they were all doing business. And business requires tolerance. And suddenly you're going to get the Inquisition. So there was no way it was going to happen. And the result was in 1566, the population of the Netherlands en masse rebelled against Philip II, including the moderate Catholics. They joined the rebellion. And the rebellion went on for 10 years. Between 1566 and 1576, Philip sent the crack Spanish army into the Netherlands to suppress the rebellion. Many towns were burned down and so on. Populations killed off. It was very bloody. By 1576, the Spanish had reconquered the southern Netherlands. This is Flanders. It's flat land. It's good agricultural land. Grain is grown there. And the Spanish army had an easy time, or a relatively easy time. They were able to retake the southern Netherlands, and that part, anybody who was not a Roman Catholic had to leave. They fled to the north. And the southern Netherlands was re-Catholicized by force. And it was subject to the Counter-Reformation, and eventually it emerged as the modern state of Belgium, which is Catholic. But the Protestants, they all went north in the hundreds of thousands. And the city of Antwerp withered. It was in the southern part. It was essentially destroyed by this war. And a new city, a new financial, commercial, and manufacturing center emerged, animated by these Protestant refugees. Amsterdam in Holland. Holland, the province of Holland, which is a large province, that became the bastion of the Protestants, the North. And what issued from this was Spain reconquered the southern Netherlands, but it could not reconquer the North, basically for three reasons. First of all, the geography is quite different in the northern part of the Low Countries from the south. There are many rivers and canals which can become fortification points for defenders. And the Dutch, call them that, they developed a very sophisticated defense against the offensives of the Spanish army. It was difficult for the Spanish army to operate in this broken terrain. And so that was one thing. The second thing that the Dutch did, they took to the sea. Of course, the whole area was maritime, but the Dutch developed a powerful navy. I would say the most powerful navy in Europe at this point. And they defended themselves by sea. And in particular, they began to attack Spanish shipping across the Atlantic. The gold and the silver coming across the Atlantic became vulnerable to these Dutch naval vessels who attacked the basis of Spanish power, the bullion, the gold and silver. So defense by river and canal, fortified, and the navy, but also as the war is going on, rather than bleeding as a result of the war, the tremendous commercial and financial power of the Dutch lead them to become more and more prosperous as a result of their secession. So they're actually gaining economic strength in the course of the war. So naval power, fortified defense, and growing economic power make it impossible for the Spaniards to reconquer the northern part of the Netherlands. Moreover, they have reinforcements across the channel. There's Elizabeth, who's become a Calvinist in her religion, and she begins to send reinforcements. She begins to send money. In 1585, 5,000 English troops move into the Netherlands to reinforce the Dutch army. And this is a declaration of war so far as Philip II is concerned. And Philip decides there and then the only way really to deal with this situation is basically to invade England and deal with this is the sort of rear area of these damn Protestants. And so he organizes what he hopes to be a great invasion of England. And this unfolds in the climactic year 1588, when Philip II, after 3 years of preparation, launches the Spanish Armada, 130 ships, men of war, equipped with 2,400 cannon and 40,000 troops, set sail from Spain and enter the English Channel. And they are met by the English Navy. And a great battle. If you look at illustrations in Unlearned, you'll see there's a painting in which the battle is represented, and you'll see that these ships, compared to the ships that I talked about earlier at the beginning of this class, these are huge men of war, galleons equipped with multiple cannons and so on. The technology of naval warfare within a century, has become incredibly sophisticated. And a showdown battle occurs in the English Channel, and the Spaniards are defeated and dispersed by the English Navy. And this is the beginning of the real ascent of English power. And what can we say about this? The cannon, the ships and the cannon of the English were superior to the Spaniards. Why was that? Because capitalism had developed in England over the course of the 16th century. Their ships, their cannon were of a higher level. In fact, the Spaniards secretly, they didn't have enough cannon, so they had to import this more sophisticated the cannon from England to equip their ships, which gives you an idea of the economic advantage of the English as compared to the Spaniards. As a result of all of this, the independence of Holland had succeeded had successfully defied the Spaniards and created an independent republic. This is after the Peasants' War. This is considered the second middle class or bourgeois revolution in Europe, based on its capitalism. Because let's be clear, Holland is the leading capitalist country. Well, we'll see how this worked out on Wednesday, because you'll be eating your turkey on Monday.